Hey family, my name is Nicole and I've been practicing manual therapy for 22 years and visceral and neural mobilization techniques for 15 years. It's 2024 for posterity. And I've recently developed a way of doing things that's a little different. It's an evolution of Asian medical theory combined with Western medicine and anatomy and physiology. And I'd like to welcome you into it. So I'll be producing courses, and I've already written and illustrated a book, and I have a course on that book and the first course in a 5-course curriculum online. So if you'd like any more information about that, you're welcome to contact me at elementaladvanced.com or elementaladvancedmt for manualtherapy.com. And like and subscribe and hit the notification buttons below because I'm going to be hopefully putting out some more content in the future and just trying to keep up with that. I know I've been slacking, so consistent imperfect action is what I'm trying to go for here. So I look forward to interacting with you, and feel free to get in touch. I also have an Instagram, elemental.advanced, and I'd love to see you there. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy these videos I have for you. Hi, welcome in. This is a workshop on the water element chapter and the Po chapter of the book that I wrote, The Tao of the Polyvagal Theory, a 5-element perspective for a future of healing the spirit and balancing the autonomic nervous system. I also illustrated this book, and the water element illustration I will show you right here is a great illustration to meditate to help shift and move energy. You can also flip it upside down and meditate to it like this. So you can play around with that, but it's a great illustration to help move energy through your system. The water element workshop will go through this chapter dealing with the Po spirit affiliation, and it is an integration of flow, and the water element helps integrate our experiences and process and dissolve into the energy matrix of the fluid matrix within your body. Also, the collective spreading of light energy through support that water offers and the flow of the water. If you can think of it from, flow of source and self into the sea and collective consciousness. So when your water element is in balance, you have this great integrative potential to really impact your community around you. So we will go through the water element chapter here, and I'd like to start by reading the quote that I put at the very beginning of the chapter, opposite the illustration page, and it's the water element and the spirit affiliation of Po lift and support the metal air element. In nature, metal dissolves into and is suspended within water. Likewise, as water transforms into steam, it takes on the qualities of air, intermingling as molecules within sublimate into vapor. Both the water element and the element of metal air are located below the horizon line of the Tan cycle, within the subterranean space and the subconscious. They have properties that are characteristic of both density and light, depending on the environment. Both water as well as metal have the ability to reflect and to change state with ease, given the proper energy and assistance. Both have the potential for growth and great brilliance and great resilience. While metal air carries a density that gently guides us into the darkness of the subconscious, the flow of water has the potential to take us out of the caves and into the light of the sun. So this is a really powerful chapter, as is the water element, a very powerful element. And the next quote I share is, "The continuous, calm, powerful use of the will shakes the forces of creation and brings a response from the infinite." And I've just always loved this quote. It's been on actually a tag I got from a yoga company brand clothing that I've had hanging up for many years. And it's by Yoga Paramahansa Yogananda. So the character for Po and the water element, I'll show it to you here. So it's the spirit affiliation of the water element and the proper spirit that's domiciled in the lungs, and we'll talk about that. So Laurie Dechar writes in her book, Five Spirits, this character, like the Chinese character Hun, Po contains the radical Gui on the right. This character means earthbound spirit and is sometimes translated as ghost. The top part represents the head of a person, while the bottom is the vaporous body of a spirit. The Gui are ephemeral mists that float lightly above the surface of things. They are mysterious yet real, delicate and sensitive yet very powerful, and especially worthy of great respect. The radical Bai on the left, meaning white, is a pictograph of the rising sun. The color white is associated with brightness and is related to the color of the eastern sky at dawn. And we'll get more into the nuance of this particular kanji as it relates to the water element a little bit later in this chapter, but I just think that description really illustrates well the qualities of water and that the spirit affiliation for water is indeed Po. So the attributes of the water element, the organ officials are the kidney is the yin organ and the bladder is the yang organ for the water element. And the purpose of water is to flow. It is our great integrator. It receives, it dissipates, and disperses. It provides a fluid matrix for energy to move within. Our human form is made of water. As such, energy travels through this fluid matrix within physical form, as we are both wave and particle. At our highest manifestations, we are the embodiment of light. The Po, the spirit affiliation, and soul of the water element is referred to as the animal wit, the animal soul, or the corporal soul. It is the very human nature. Unlike the Hun that linger on after our bodies return to earth, the Po dies with us, vaporizing just as water sublimates with the assistance of the heat of fire. Perhaps if the light of the Hun and the strength of fire element is not sufficient to vaporize the watery Po, the fluid nature of our spirit, then our corporal soul will be bound to another lifetime, as in the case of ancestral karma. Entering through the bladder meridian, the uterus, and through the water element of the child at the time of birth. Within the wheel of karma, the goal is to enlighten as much as possible through this lifetime in order to eviscerate the Po upon death. And that cycle of energy flowing within the water element that contributes to ancestral karma, that gets seated within then the child as it's born and the kidneys of the child. So the kidneys, as we have found in the wood element chapter, is home to the spirit, the proper spirit of Ji, which is bifurcated in the general Ji concept as the free will. So Ji is the concept of the will. And in my thesis, my philosophy here that I present in the book, I separate it into two types of will. We have divine will and free will. So the free will is seated in the kidneys. And that is how ancestral karma passes through. If we energetically don't deal with our emotions and what our soul is supposed to experience and grow through in this life and are not on that process and that flow, then those energies can get passed in through. And then our offspring can be affected by that, and their free will decisions with the energy that's seated in their kidneys can then exemplify and exhibit the karma that they have come to absorb throughout their line. So it is really important, the water element is to help dissolve and dissipate any of that density. So we are carrying through in our offspring energetically and physically, our physical embodiment in the ancestral line. So we are, giving that line and that energy as much lightness and support as possible to then carry on their soul's process and their soul's growth without having to relive or heal for ours that we have not dealt with in this lifetime. So the water element is really, really important as far as reproduction goes as well. Perhaps the light of the Hun and the strength of the fire element is not sufficient to vaporize the watery Po or the fluid nature of our spirit. In this case, our corporal soul will be bound to another lifetime. And that is basically that concept where we can see that and pass it on, especially if we're not doing the work with our heart and our fire element and really welcoming our experience as a human into love with our internal dialogue, as well as the dialogue that we maintain and keep around us, and the friends that we keep, and our energy that we move through life within, in this earthbound spirit and world that we are in. So an empty light heart filled with the feathery grace of the Shen, and this is essential for this practice of transmutation throughout life. So using that empty, light-hearted embodiment, where the Shen is able to really occupy your heart spirit and really be that guiding light. When the animal soul passes, so when we pass from this earth, the heart in ancient Egypt is said to be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, and compared on the scales of Anubis. So on one scale side you have the heart, and then another feather. So this is the ancient Egyptian concept of what are you carrying with you in this lifetime? How much love have you embodied, and what's the lightness of your heart and its weight at the time of death? So a lot of ancient cultures have this type of symbolism, and especially in Egypt, it's been a really important one. It's a really synergistic, energetic connection from the fire element to the water element as well in that way. And a lot of, I'll refer to it further in the chapter, a lot of traditional Chinese medicine actually refers to the fire-water connection in a lot of ways. And this is a really supportive and lifting and transformative way that we talk about here. So the two soul spirits, the Hun of the fire element and the Po of the water element, have an intimate relationship with each other. The Hun and the Po are both yang in nature, but the Po is yin when related to the Hun. And I take this to mean that the Po soul aspect of the spirit that's domiciled within the lungs is yin in nature, as are the lungs. And the Po soul, the spirit affiliation of the water element, is a yang in nature. The spirit Hun, proper noun, associated with the triple warmer and locations of brown adipose tissue throughout the body, which is associated with the fire element, and the spirit Po, which is associated with the lungs and the metal air element, are linked by polarity. Anatomically, this is seen through the apex of the lung, where brown adipose tissue is located. This is the location of the upper burner above the clavicle in the thoracic inlet area. Notably, the Hun often reside within the lesser omentum, as mentioned previously, and that now we're talking about the proper spirit Hun that reside in that tissue system of the triple warmer. A lot of times they're in this area of the lesser omentum and the inferior to the diaphragm in the abdominal cavity. They are the Hun are traditionally often found there specifically, and do not travel within the entire triple warmer complex of tissues, just and disperse deposits of brown adipose tissue within the viscera. These areas of brown adipose tissue, they do travel within the entire triple warmer complex and all of the brown adipose tissue areas. These areas of brown adipose tissue correspond with nerve endings of the vagus nerve. And as such, the brown adipose tissue and the triple warmer energy complex are very relative to the autonomic nervous system regulation. The Hun and the Po are directly linked energetically with the Tan cycle and the U angles through the axis of the fire element and the water element, as well as physically through the anatomical location of brown adipose tissue near the kidneys, which it surrounds the kidneys, and the urinary pathways. So that's a direct anatomical link between the fire and the water elements and that fire-water connection. The water element has significant potentials for integration. The natural polarity of the holographic Po, proper spirit, and Po, spirit affiliation, so the Po, proper spirit that resides in the lungs, and the Po, spirit affiliation that resides in the water element in general, or yin-yang relationship is evident through the powerful integration and balancing potential of the water element and the ability of the lungs to take in moisture and life force energy and release vapor and toxins through the breath, coming into a place of neutrality. The Po's residence in the lungs enable life to keep living. With every breath we take, we have a potential for animation and integration to flow freely on our chosen path in life. The potential for reanimation also exists through the power of the lungs to activate the resilient parasympathetic ventral vagal regulatory response through associations with the holographic potentials represented within the water element and the sympathetic stress response, which assists in a shift away from parasympathetic dorsal vagal dominance and a response on the spectrum of immobilization. So when we are in a parasympathetic dorsal vagal stress response, we are immobilized. And there's a spectrum of that, and that we talk about that a lot in the metal air element chapter. The Po spirits in the lungs are the animating agents of vital life processes that take place beyond our conscious awareness and control. And that is a quote from Laurie Dechar in The Five Spirits, although she does not refer to the Po specifically as I refer to it in this book. I've evolved a lot of the symbolism that she represents in The Five Spirits. So the Yang Po of the water element are related to the 7 emotions in Asian medical theory: fear, fright, anger, joy, worry, sadness, and grief. In the order that these are displayed in within the book here, as I write, that order corresponds to the 5-element flow of qi within the Shang cycle, actually. And we talk more about the Shang cycle. It's a classical, traditional Chinese medical theory that is represented in the first parts of the book. These emotions stir the waters of our soul and activate the Po. Oppression and rumination are also considered emotions, but ones that stagnate the waters of the mind, causing the heart to gradually fill and grow heavy, displacing the Shen toward the earth and reducing the power of the warmth that assists with the water element with potentials for integration. We talk a little bit more about that concept in the earth element chapter as well. So the animating corporal presence of the Po is what connects us to our senses. It keeps us connected to the sacred space of our physical body and emotional experience. The Po is associated with the sympathetic nervous system, and it's related to the emotions of fear and fright, as well as reaction to touch, through energetic connection with the dorsal root ganglion of the spinal column and the sacral sympathetic chain ganglion, both of which follow the bladder meridian. The Po's nexus with the parasympathetic nervous system involves the sacral parasympathetic or pelvic splanchnic nerves. The sensory experience of the internal environment through the Po is associated with the concept of interoception and the visceral vagal afferent receptors at the organs of the body. This energetic connection within the water element rests on the path of the kidney divergent channel that ascends to meet the bladder meridian at the dorsal vagal nuclei complex in the medulla of the brainstem. This complex receives afferent information from the viscera, relaying that information to higher order neurons and nuclei within the limbic system, basal nuclei, and cortex. The Ji spirit, or free will of the kidneys, connects with its holographic counterpart, the Ji spirit affiliation of the wood element, or divine will, when the kidney divergent channel meets with the primary channel of the gallbladder meridian near the nucleus ambiguus in the brainstem, contributing to the orchestration of proper autonomic balance or dysregulation through the energetic nexus with this vagal nuclei. Alignment of the Ji, proper noun, and Ji, spirit affiliation, free will with divine will, helps to balance the autonomic nervous system. The triple warmer, gallbladder, and bladder primary channels work together to align the body's energy systems at that vagal nuclei in this area of the foramen magnum and jugular foramen. So there are several vagal nuclei in the medulla, and that area specifically is a nexus for the triple wormer gallbladder and bladder primary channels to work together, as well as the governing vessel and the kidney diversion channel. So you have there the roots, basically, of resilience and autonomic regulation, proper autonomic function, and it can all be achieved by releasing restriction in the viscera. So the afferent fibers of the vagus nerve, dorsal vagus and ventral vagus, are then free to receive information from the body and align it with information coming down in our divine channels, basically. And we get to access more of our central nervous system and more of our connection in our brain and our neuroendocrine system when that alignment is occurring, and the flow of energy then flows through those vagal nuclei in the brainstem to help regulate the autonomic nervous system. And then we have balance and not dis-ease. If the Po of the water element is unable to be supported by the ventral vagal regulatory system and the wisdom of the Ji within the wood element, the human experience is one of sympathetic arousal and a spectrum of anxiety. The qualities of fight or flight that we are so familiar with from historical concepts of the stress reaction are like a stream of turbid rapids rushing to the sea or a wave breaking on the shore. There is no ease, there is no grace, there is only survival. Some psycho-emotional characteristics of this type of stress response affecting the Po of the water element include traits of reacting instead of responding, anxiety, the quality of which is related to extreme necessity for movement or a sense of pressure building like steam, running away from relationships or difficult conversations, feeling as though you cannot respond or engage with yourself or others, as if you are unable to connect internally with your desires and ideas, holding back words, or feeling overwhelmed in situations as if you were drowning in that experience. The sympathetic stress response is not only fight or flight, this is really interesting, but also can be characteristic of emotional and physical bracing, holding, protecting, and flexing behaviors that are rooted in a need for control of one's internal and external environments. This is the inability to feel safe and have faith or a trust in the process. Within this imbalance, there is an inability to receive the presence of flow, and we actually see this a whole lot in toddlers and the stress that they're under, trying to figure out and navigate through the world. We see a lot of that bracing, holding, protecting, and flexing, as it's a very stressful experience coming in from being a baby, and then your cognitive awareness is developing, and all of a sudden you're able to interact more with the world. You're trying to learn language and speak, and you don't have that grasp and that control and that dexterity yet, physically or cognitively. And it's this struggle that we see that age range in. So it's really important to recognize that if you have a toddler or if you deal with toddlers. Some physical aspects of a sympathetic stress response, actually let me also add, or if you deal with people that have cognitive disabilities, anyone that is on a cognitive development deficiency. So even, adults that haven't evolved past a certain age because of a neural compromised and cognitive development issues, we really need to be respectful and aware of that as well, that stress response that they are under. So some physical aspects of a sympathetic stress response with the qualities of Po include physically joint pain or other pain that comes and goes, difficulty breathing, including symptoms of asthma, skin eruptions and rashes, eczema or psoriasis patches, lipomas, fibroids, edema, withholding bodily functions such as decreased urination and constipation, and increased urination can also be a symptom. Increased urination is actually really interesting because it's often observed as an indicator of stress response, but may go unnoticed or not attributed to stress. This happens, the increase in urination happens due to an upregulation and activation of vasopressin receptors. Vasopressin is known as antidiuretic hormone, and it's one of the key neurotransmitters referenced in the Polyvagal Theory. It's responsible for decreased urination in some circumstances, but it also leads to an increase in the case of chronic stress. Release of vasopressin happens during acute stress response to increase our blood pressure in preparation for fight or flight. It also stimulates release of adrenal corticotropin hormone from the anterior pituitary, which signals the release of aldosterone from the adrenal glands. Now, aldosterone is what increases urination when experiencing chronic stress. That does not result in mobilization behavior. So if you do notice you're stressed and your urination is increasing, it's a very good idea to go for a run, do some kind of bike riding, dancing, some kind of mobilization behavior that would help balance that out and discharge that stress response. This whole process can disrupt electrolyte balance and lead to low potassium levels, which is an inability of water to support metal. Potassium is a mineral. And the mineral saturation within the fluid matrix. This process may be modulated by the wood element and is directly related to the balance and synergy between the gallbladder meridian and the governing vessel meridian. Points and organs on both of these channels affect the emotional processing of the limbic system, which affects the regulatory functions of the hypothalamus, where vasopressin is synthesized and released within the hypophyseal portal to affect the anterior pituitary. These physical symptoms are a result of the Po being weak because the Ji, or divine will, attributed to the wood element, cannot lift and support the seat of free will within the kidneys. In other words, the parasympathetic ventral vagal regulatory functions of the autonomic nervous system are not strong enough to lift, support, and transform the natural sympathetic response to stress. My light just turned off. See if I can get it to red on. Oh, need to plug back in real quick. Okay, so the natural sympathetic response to stress and the kidneys where the Ji are, that also includes the adrenal glands as well, because the adrenal glands sit right on top of the kidneys. A weakened Po that is not backed by a healthy ventral vagal regulatory response may be attributed to physical and energetic restriction going back further in the Tan cycle to the fire element and the Hun nested in the lesser omentum, as well as an imbalance of the Shen of the earth element, so the Shen spirit affiliation of the earth element. And we see that through associations in the U angles, where if there's an issue with the water element, we can look to the earth element and the fire element to do mobilizations in the viscera and visceral meridian channels of those elements to help shift the flow of energy to move toward the water element and lifting and supporting it towards transformation. Restrictions within the lesser omentum, which is a part of the fire element and triple Gormer complex. Restrictions there prevent free flow of accurate vagal afferent information from the viscera to the brainstem through the nodos ganglion located within the hepatic hilum and the upper hepatoduodenal ligament of the lesser omentum. As noted earlier, restrictions here can also prevent release of proper amounts of digestive enzymes from the biliary tree and the pancreas. So I talk about that in the fire element chapter. Tensions in the lesser omentum reaching to the area of the hepatic portal of vein can also cause a backup in fluids within the abdomen, creating edema and pressure around the kidneys. This may also affect the diaphragm, creating tension from the physical restriction in the area, as well as the change in pressure differential between the thorax and the abdomen. As the body adapts to allostatic load, or the physiological effects of the presence of chronic stress within the internal and external environment, energetic and physical tensions begin to build. The body has a response through interoception, and an emotion is the result, often on the spectrum of fear or anxiety. The more chronic the stressor, and the more developed the trauma patterning within the nervous system, the more potential for physical and energetic examples of how the Hun may not be able to lift and support the spirit of the Ji, leading to backsliding in the Tan cycle, affecting the Po of the water element, rendering it unable to lift and support the functions of the metal air element, causing weakness in the Po spirit of the lungs, and the Yi, spirit affiliation of the metal air element. And an immobilization response then begins to unfold. This backsliding within the Tan cycle and breaking down of the lifting and supporting functions of the 5 elements is analogous to the concept of dissolution presented in the Polyvagal Theory. Now I'll read to you a quote from the Polyvagal Theory. Dissolution is a construct introduced by philosopher Herbert Spencer to describe evolution in reverse. It was adapted by John Hewlings Jackson to describe how brain damage and brain disease function similarly to a process of de-evolution, in which evolutionarily older circuits become disinhibited. Polyvagal theory adapts dissolution to explain the phylogenetically ordered hierarchy in which the autonomic nervous system responds with progressively evolutionarily older circuits. And this is somewhat of a controversial concept of the polyvagal theory, but if we take that statement and that assumption and reference it into the framework here in this book of the 5 elements and how the elements interact with each other, it makes sense. And it actually, interestingly, when the water element is unable to lift and support the metal element in a solution, usually from too much heat from the fire element, metal will precipitate out of the solution or dissolution. A similar process also happens as a function of cooling within the sky. When the water vapor reaches a dew point, as air rises and encounters cooler temperatures in the upper atmosphere, it condenses, forming clouds. When the air cools further, water precipitates out of air, forming rain. So you have another dissolution. In this way, the relationship between the water element and the metal air element is a very intimate one and can be volatile depending on physical, for instance, lack of blood flow, inflammation, connective tissue restrictions, etc., and energetic or emotional forms of hot and cold shifts within the internal and external environment. These concepts of hot and cold temperature control can apply physically and energetically to aspects of the fire element and the spirit affiliation of Hun and spirit of Shen. But also, we know brown adipose tissue is involved in thermoregulation within the body. So hot and cold regulation actually physically within the body. And that is a part of the Hun spirit as well in the fire element. The concept of dissolution within the 5 elements relative to the polyvagal theory is the initiation of a backsliding motion within the Tan cycle due to stress or trauma negatively affecting the spirit affiliations, resulting in a breakdown of support within the hierarchical negentropic system of the Tan cycle. Within this process of dissolution, the parasympathetic ventral vagal regulatory functions associated with the healthy and balanced wood and fire elements are not able to appropriately manage the internal or external environmental stressor. This can be due to trauma history, physical or energetic restrictions on the meridian pathways anywhere in the body, or innate physiology. And innate physiology references your genetic code, basically, and what your constitution is, if you, for instance, don't produce enough of a certain non-essential amino acid, that can have an impact on this as well. We get a little bit more into that, into some of the nutrition work and the Elemental Advanced Method courses that I have, especially on the earth element, which deals with amino acids. If the innate physiology of a person under stress or trauma cannot support a healthy return to parasympathetic ventral vagal regulation, or if the sympathetic response is not able to fight or flight, the parasympathetic dorsal vagal nervous system may be recruited in a last-ditch effort for self-preservation and survival as the immobilization response begins to unfold. This is akin to the Tan cycle backsliding all the way to the metal air element and can result in the energy of the person under stress turning to stone in a freeze or feign spectrum response. This can manifest psychologically and physically through a myriad of symptoms, including depression, dissociation, immobilization reactions, twitching, fainting, blackouts, acute abdominal pain, chronic pain such as fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, chronic inflammation, autoimmune illness, breakdowns in the digestive processes, problems with blood pressure and variability in regulation, low heart rate, low body temperature, and in extreme cases, bradycardia. And that is talked about also in the Polyvagal Theory. Physiologically, the parasympathetic dorsal vagal reaction to stress or trauma is very hard to get out of because of our nervous system. Our human mammalian nervous system has no efficient pathway out of becoming a stone. We need to cognitively recruit our sympathetic stress response through our prefrontal cortex of the bladder meridian to step in for the immobilization response that is generated as a survival technique by our dorsal vagus. From this state of sympathetic mobilization, the ventral vagus can come online to assist in autonomic regulation. Once we are able to be well regulated and the emotional awareness and physical balance of the ventral vagus, we are able to manifest the true path of our soul in this life free from immobilization response of the dorsal vagus and guided by the divine will of Ji and the light of the Hun. The animal soul and the free will of the Ji are now able to align within the kidneys and the water element with the purpose towards integration and evolution of ourself, adding to the collective consciousness. So this is the process of self-actualization. When the wood element is strong and able to support the water element, the sympathetic nervous system can act in positive ways throughout the body, increasing blood flow, promoting growth and restoration, healing and renewal, and providing the energy for integration of physical and emotional trauma. Because we are never going to be free of our trauma, we need to integrate it and honor it and move forward with it, inviting it into a light and a process of love so it's not so heavy, precipitating out, causing a lack of embodiment. As discussed within the other spirit affiliations, the early childhood experiences one has significantly impact physiological and neurological resilience. Creating stability within the Tan cycle is a process, and once a structure is set, you can heal some parts of it in this lifetime if given the appropriate support. However, some parts and aspects of this innate framework of one's nervous system may be more constitutional than others, and the energy needed to grow, to integrate, and to transform in this lifetime may be very great. In these cases, the interplay between water and metal air can lead to the transformation of subconscious patterning. This type of transformation requires orchestration. It requires the help of divine guidance and the spirit light of the Hun within the fire element, as well as a healthy Shen population nested in the heart, directing their light toward the Ji, or free will ego, within the kidneys, and the animal soul, or the Po, of the lungs within the metal air element, to be included with this alignment. This interaction between fire, water, metal, air can be seen in the diagram of the U angles within the last section of this manual. And I will go ahead and flip that flip to that right now and show you a picture of it. So this is a treatment theory that I developed called the U angles, and it is elaborated on in that last section of the book. Just like the processes in the outward environment that create precipitation from metal from water and water from air, too much heat or too much internal fire can lead to water being able to support metal. Similarly, too little internal fire and a cool atmosphere above the earth can lead to air being unable to support water in reciprocity, resulting in rain. However, the right amount of warmth and a gentle, consistent light from the hun and the shen can be very, very healing. From the fire element can be very healing. Steady increases in temperature can lead to greater kinetic energy that allows for the solvent molecules, the Po of water, to more easily break apart the solute molecules that have a strong intermolecular attraction. In this case, water has a great capacity to suspend and support the spirit affiliation of Yi, of the metal air element, and our consciousness of potentials, which is self-actualization, as well as the innate structure within our subconscious of how we process emotional experiences. Steady warmth and light assist the water element with integration, and this increases solubility and convection, both processes associated with integration. The resilience of Po. Within the character for Po, and we'll go back, I'll show you that again. I'm about to talk about that kanji specifically. Here we go. Here's that character for Po again. Within the character for Po, the symbol white, the quality is the symbol for white, the quality of the light of the moon and the silvering of the shadows at night. The symbol for Gui is relative to the dark sides of our ego, the potent mix of our animal soul, the Po, and the free will egoic aspects of the spirit Ji and the kidneys. The resilience and brilliance of the water element can be found where the light of the moon illuminates the shadows of our soul. Human nature as a shadow side that is created by experience and time. When we give enough pause in the daily flow of our lives to reflect on the image of our shadow in the waters before us, we are able to participate in a process of awareness that will lead to our ultimate renewal. When we are triggered by trauma, drama, or stress in our lives, or therapy that is purposely triggering and somewhat unethical, we are able to stop and reflect. If we are able to stop and reflect on our actions with the wisdom and equanimity of an aligned Ji, which some of us innately in the beginning are not because of the alignment of our nervous system is out of whack and off balance and blocked. If we are able to stop and reflect on our reactions with the wisdom and equanimity of an aligned Ji from a vantage point within a stable and balanced wood element, the regulatory functions of our ventral vagus are able to calm and reason with our animal soul. Reason, recruiting that prefrontal cortex of the bladder, meridian channels. This lifts and supports our ability to process and respond appropriately to situations we encounter, so we do not slip into a reactionary state of sympathetic stress or dorsal vagal immobilization. In this way, we are able to break free of the trauma cycle and reunite with divine will, the Ji of the wood element, and the free will, spirit Ji, domiciled within the kidneys, which is alignment. It is here where we may lean on the integrated powers of the water element and renew ourselves with our divine nature, guided by the Hun and the light of the Shen. So guided by the fire element. So it's fire, lifts and supports wood to lift and support water. The shadow self must be integrated and renewed within the water element. For this alignment to happen in a gentle, non-re-traumatizing way. And that's what all this work is about, gentle, non-re-traumatizing practice. This is done most gently with the lifting and supporting nature of the wood element, just as the silvery light of a full moon is filtered through the leaves of a tree. And the wood element is the human element. So that is a co-regulatory process, or we can recruit, ideally as adults, a process in which our internal wood element helps self-regulate us. And that also is sort of like, if we want to refer it into a reference for water, it's like a baptism, a renewal, alignment and renewal. We don't have to qualify baptism as religious necessarily. If you are religious and would like that visualization, you're more than welcome to. But water renews things, it refreshes, it cleanses as well. We can think of it in that way. On a physiological level, too much heat or light from the fire element, too much emotion leads to lack of reason when processing. As the energy of fire bypasses the lifting and supporting properties of wood in the ventral vagus and creates an assault on the water element, taking the frontal lobe of the brain along the bladder meridian offline, disrupting our cognitive processing potential. And this happens many times in cases of acute trauma or stress. This often leads to more trauma or drama and an activation of the sympathetic nervous system. This is how neural impulses originating in the emotional centers of the brain and the limbic system activate the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. These structures then interact with the basal nuclei in the brain along the bladder meridian to initiate movement through the peripheral nervous system, actualizing fight or flight response. So that's neurologically how it is mediated. It's through that bladder meridian and the sympathetic nervous system and the water element. The kinetic energy that has been created within the sympathetic nervous system needs to flow out of the body through being transferred into movement. If the energy is not physiologically transferred, backsliding within the TON cycle occurs, and the shift into parasympathetic dorsal vagal pathway in pathology happens, resulting in physical and emotional symptoms on the spectrum of immobilization, which we go through in the previous chapters. Within the water element, as well as the metal air element, the allostatic load of stress can also signal acute sacral parasympathetic responses and potentially symptoms of vasovagal reflux, which includes spontaneous urination or defecation and syncope, fainting. How we return to flow. The primal nature of the Po is an embodiment of resilience. Movement is essential for the discharge of emotional energy from the body. In order to return to a state of flow and integration, to be able to access the lifting and supporting rhythm of the ventral vagus through the wood and fire elements, a focus must be shifted to the root so the water may rise from root to branch. The sacral chakra, or sacral plexus, is associated with the water element. This area is neurologically tied to the sympathetic nervous system, adrenals, genitourinary system, and last part of the large intestine from the sigmoid colon down, as well as the parasympathetic sacral splanchnic nerves. This illustrates another nexus between the water and metal air elements. And I talk about that in detail in the water element course and the elemental manual meridian theory and techniques courses, part of the elemental advanced method. In order to initiate a return to flow through the wood element, the sacral chakra must recruit the root chakra. They must work together just as the roots of a tree engage water and initiate a pumping action to slowly raise water from its resting place within the substrate of metal and earth. Linking the breath with contractions of the pelvic floor assists in a rise of the water element. Breathing low into the lungs, and I teach that I like to breathe into the very bottom of the lungs, the sides of the lungs by the rib cage, that activates the ventral vagus, and it has a connection with the auricular branch of the vagus nerve as well, that helps activate the triple wormer complex and the triple wormer meridian channel to help recruit that ventral vagus and bring that resilience online. Breathing low into the lungs right there with a relaxed diaphragm. No focus on belly breathing. We don't want to do that, because by belly breathing, we'll focus on the dorsal vagal parasympathetic nervous system, and then it's like your nervous system's fighting against itself, especially if you have a history of trauma. So the way that breath work has been taught a lot is actually not the healthiest. We need to be focused on breathing into the lower portions of the lungs at the sides of the rib cage, and then having that air fill, expand, and kind of act like a vacuum to just effortlessly fill the rest of the lungs. By default, the diaphragm will contract lower and the abdomen will distend, but we do not want to have a mental focus on that. We certainly do not want to put our hand there. It's much better to even support yourself by putting your opposite hand on the opposite part of the lungs. If that is not comforting for you, if it feels too restrictive, you can just focus, and you can put your hands on your hips if you want, if you need a hand there, or just focus on that area. Just try to mentally connect with it, because that's going to be the most beneficial to light up your neural connections. So breathing low into the lungs with a relaxed diaphragm, then extending the out breath while simultaneously contracting the diaphragm consciously and the pelvic floor. So if you know what Kegel exercises are, that out breath should be extended as far as possible, should be longer than the in breath that you took. More effort is being made, and that's when you activate the diaphragm and the pelvic diaphragm, the pelvic floor. So the thoracic diaphragm and the pelvic diaphragm, and you pump them both together up. It's a very powerful way to initiate restoration. Repeating the sequence in a flowing pattern like waves will stimulate a healthy sympathetic response, and it assists in lifting the spirit from an immobilization reflex or reaction. In my experience, I've found that it is good to follow this exercise with movement of some sort, walking, Tai Chi movements, dancing. However one is able to comfortably move, it's important to integrate movement that is not stressful to the body. So I would caution against running or anything too stressfully active, anything getting yourself too activated. Gentle movement is what we want here. Especially any playful movement that can be easily accessed within your physical ability, followed by a resting phase of calm. And this will help shift the body as the parasympathetic ventral vagal regulatory system takes over for the sympathetic nervous system. Balance of the emotions and the autonomic nervous system can be achieved much more easily from this place than when the body is in a state of immobilization or emotionally shut down. The root chakra and the sacral chakra are very much linked neurologically. Recruiting the muscles of the pelvic floor activates the wood element by engaging the liver divergent channel that runs through the pelvic floor area and the gallbladder meridian, as well as the vagus nerve. That it all runs through the gallbladder or through the pelvic floor area in the pelvic bowl. The vagus nerve sends parasympathetic fibers all the way down to the genital area, and this way, recruiting the pelvic floor muscles helps increase vagal tone through energetically engaging the wood element, just as the xylem within trees contract to lift water from the roots into circulation within the matrix of the wood. Both energetic and physical movement is essential for the resilience of the human body and the soul. The human body and soul need movement in order to integrate our experience and return from a state of being frozen in stone, such as when there is a backsliding through the Tan cycle and an entropic process of overwhelm and disillusion. Even the simple act of shaking or wiggling can be enough to stir the roots of the autonomic nervous system to respond in a healthy way. Finding a neurologic path to resilience in the landscape of debilitating stress or intense trauma can sometimes be hard as we try our best to see through the fog. In these times, we must instead feel through the fog by returning to our body through gentle, supportive motion, a reconnection with our animal soul. Physical vibration is energetic vibration. Like the singing of a crystal bowl, these harmonics create waves within our fluid fascial matrix on a quantum level. And like water and waves, we begin to rise. And this is a really nice picture at the back of that chapter that exemplifies that. So that was the water chapter. It is a big one, and it's very, very important. Working with the meridians and the visceral channels of the water element is super powerful for working with post-concussive syndrome, along with working with the fire element. So I really like doing treatments. I call it kinesura treatments. It's Japanese for like helping and supporting. And so if you have a symptom, I don't have this treatment schematic in the book. I've developed it since I wrote the book. So I have the U angles and the Tan cycle illustrated within the book, but then there's this other one that I've come to develop, and it's when you have a symptom, insert a certain element, for instance, the wood element, and the brain for post-concussive syndrome, and you're working with the meridians and channels and the visceral channels of the water element and the fire element to help hold and support that in a very gentle way, so that the organs and the channels, the energy channels of that element can then alchemize. So it's really powerful. So I'll probably write about that in a case study. I do have a client I've been working with, and they had been falling from several accidents and received concussions, but they were all involved. It all involved like a fright and falling from a distance. And within one session, working with his kidneys, it was able to really discharge a lot of the trauma. And also with the kidney diversion channel, like I spoke about, up where the dorsal vagal and ventral vagal nuclei, the relay station basically in the vagal nuclei in your brainstem, working with those areas, was able to really help balance him quite substantially. It was pretty profound in one session. He had about 60 to 80% improvement in just one session, just right off the bat, and then it kind of became more 80% after a couple days. So the body has a really amazing way of integrating and receiving once you give it that support to be able to be still and just alchemize. So if you're interested in learning more about this curriculum and working with me in a mentorship for learning the actual techniques that help mobilize this treatment theory and integrate it into your practice, I do have online courses and in-person workshops, and I offer one-to-one mentorships and group mentorships. So just please reach out. It's elementaladvanced.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this water element session, and feel free to look back at the book at any time and look at the illustration. The illustration is great for helping move energy through your system and integrating, and it's a great meditative illustration to relax to. So cheers. Have a good night.